Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Chirag Balyan, Assistant Professor of Law at Maharashtra National Law University, Mumbai. The topic of today's discussion deals with rights of the victims to get restitution, assistance and compensation. This discussion on the topic will dwell upon the place of the victim in the criminal law and the necessity of victim-centric laws, international legal framework on the victim rights and the concept of restitution, assistance and compensation. For centuries, the criminal law has been seen as concerning state and offenders only. Though its chief purpose is to protect the society, the person who has suffered in crime has always been overlooked. This has resulted in the distortions in criminal justice administration. The presumption that justice to victim is met when offender is convicted is farce, inequitable and unjust. The iniquities of the criminal administration subject the victim to another level of victimization, which is at the hands of system, that is secondary victimization. Thus, there is dire necessity of victim-centric law that ensures the rights of the victim at pre-trial, trial and post-trial stage, as it is necessary to restore the balance in the criminal administration. The law, as far as rights of victims are concerned, is evolving. It can be understood at two levels. First is participatory level. It talks about victims' right to participate in criminal proceedings. This includes right to be pleaded, right to be assisted and represented by their own counsel and right to know. At second level, it concerns the reparative and protective rights of the victims. It includes victims' right to receive compensation from the criminal court for the losses and injuries suffered. As to the latter rights, there is a general consensus across the jurisdiction to confer them through appropriate legislations. Having appreciated the locus of victim in criminal law, let's look into the international legal framework on victim rights. We can start with England, as it's the first one to introduce distinct statute for victims. England in 1964 passed the Criminal Injuries Compensation Scheme to provide for the compensation by the state to the victims. In 1972, Criminal Justice Act was passed. It talked in terms of restitution to victims, that is, payment of money by the offenders. The Criminal Justice Act of 1982 took a step further by providing for a compensation as a sole penalty, and in cases where the courts have made order for payment of both fine and compensation, if court choose not to award compensation, it shall give reasons which may be subject to judicial review by the victim. This shows the progressive approach of the UK legislature, advancing towards the victim rights. As far as United States of America is concerned, the Victim and Witness Protection Act of 1982 governs the field. It authorizes a federal court to award restitution by means of monetary compensation as a part of a convict sentence. The Act requires courts to consider in every case the need to provide restitution to any victims of the offence. Though it is not mandatory for the court to award restitution in every case, the Act demands that the court provide its reasons for denying the same. In 1984, the Victims of Crime Act was enacted by the US Congress, which established a crime victims fund within the US Treasury. As far as the legal position is concerned, in the international organization, we have to look back at 1985, whereby two virtual simultaneously powerful documents were issued, urging the international community to enhance the status of the victims. The first one was the United Nations Declaration of Basic Principles of Justice for Victims of Crime and Abuse of Power. It is considered to be the Magna Carta for victims. The second one was the Council of Europe recommendations on the position of the victim in the framework of criminal law and procedure, which was also adopted in the same year. The other international documents of similar nature are the Statement of Victims' Rights in the Process of Criminal Justice, issued by European Forum for Victim Services in 1996, the European Union Framework Decision on the Standing of Victims in Criminal Proceedings, and the most recent and most comprehensive example, the Council of Europe Recommendations 2006 on Assistance to Victim. This was adopted on June 14, 2006. The basic principles of justice contain following rights of the victims. First, access to justice and fair treatment. Second, restitution. Third, assistance. And fourth, compensation. Out of these, we will focus on the last three one by one. Friends, let's start with restitution. Restitution is compensation made by the criminal himself, ordered by the criminal court and accomplished by the offenders as a part of his criminal sentence. Restitution includes return of property or payment for the harm or loss suffered. In broader terms, the term restitution may be regarded to include the return of property by an offender to his or her victim, the payment of money by an offender to his or her victim, the provision of any service by an offender to his or her victim, or the provision of service by an offender to any third party. Pertinently, restitution by offender as a practice is not a new phenomena and is prevalent since ancient times. Throughout the history, restitution has been used as a punitive measure. Ancient law codes like Babylon Code, Hammurabi Code, Roman 12 tables have a mention of restitution in addition to other remedies. The primary purpose of such restitution was not to compensate the victim, but to protect the offender from violent retaliation by the victim or the community. It was a means by which the offender could buy back the peace he had broken. The UN Basic Principles of Justice for Victims of Crime and Abuse of Power 1985 also provide for restitution to victims. It states that offender should make a fair restitution to victims or their families, and restitution should be part of sentencing in criminal cases. Furthermore, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution titled Basic Principles and Guidelines on the Right to a Reparation and Remedy for Victims of Gross Violations of International Human Rights Law and Serious Violation of International Humanitarian Law. This was passed in 2005. According to this, restitution shall be provided to re-establish the situation that existed prior to violation of human rights or international humanitarian law. Restitution requires inter alia, restoration of liberty, family life, citizenship, return to one's place of residence, and restoration of employment or property. In a very narrow sense, there is a provision for restitution under Code of Criminal Procedure also. Sections 45 and 452, by putting an onus on the accused to place the victims back into the possession of his property that he was unlawfully deprived of, creates a kind of a duty to provide the restitution to such victim. The Honorable Supreme Court of India, in case of Ankush Shivaji Gaikwad versus State of Maharashtra, while emphasizing on restitution, remarked that clock appeared to have come full circle by the lawmakers and courts going back in a great measure to what was in ancient times commonplace. This certainly reflects that restitution was well ingrained within the primitive society, and its surfacing again in the modern society is not mere a coincidence. However, the basic question that one may ask is that why we need restitution at all? Friends, restitution has been seen as an alternative paradigm to punishment. criminologists argue that it has punitive, correctional and pure restitution functions. According to Stephen Schaffer, punitive restitution, like punishment, must always be the subject of judicial consideration. Without exception, it must be carried out by personal performance by the wrongdoer and should even then be equally burdensome and just for all criminals, irrespective of their means, whether they be millionaires or laborers. Interestingly, correctional restitution, on the other hand, does not allow the offender to terminate his relationship with his victim, but rather forces this relationship to be maintained until the victim's original position is restored. Thereby, correctional restitution holds the promise of both restitution to victim of crime and implementation of the reformative and corrective goals of the criminal law. The other approach of restitution, which has raised a lot of debate, is one introduced by Randy Barnett in 1977. It is called pure restitution. He defines it as forced compensation or imposed fine. Pure restitution is accomplished by sentencing an offender to make restitution only. It blurs the distinction between the civil law and criminal law. Thus, in light of above, restitution is seen as a new paradigm of punishment altogether. Now, having understood the nuances of restitution, let's discuss about compensation and how it is different from restitution. In very simple terms, compensation means an amount of money ordered by the court to be paid by the accused or the state to the victim. Compensation can be punitive, reformative or proportional to the harm done. It depends upon the aims of the court, that with what objective court wants to give the compensation. However, Jeremy Bentham had a different vision. Famous utilitarian grounded justification for payment of compensation in the social contract theory, wherein he said the responsibility of the state to protect the person and property of the citizen. State compensation is further justified because it is political, economic and social institution of the state that generate crime by poverty, discriminations, unemployment and insecurity. The primary difference between restitution and compensation is that while restitution refer to remedies which draw wholly upon the resources of the offender, compensation on the other hand refers to making whole of the victim by the state. Compensation is a responsibility assumed by society. It is civil in character and thus represents a known criminal welfare goal. Restitution, on the other hand, allocates responsibility to the offender. A claim for restitution by the criminal is penal in character and thus manifests a correctional goal in the criminal process. The Basic Principles of Justice for Victims, 1985, recognize the right of victims of crime to receive just and reasonable compensation. The declaration pertinently provided that when compensation is not fully available from the offender or other sources, states should endeavor to provide financial compensation to victims who have died or who have sustained significant bodily injury or impairment of physical or mental health as a result of serious crimes, or have become physically or mentally incapacitated as a result of such victimization. Thus, it mandates national funds should also be established and consolidated by the domestic jurisdictions. United Nations General Assembly passed one more resolution in 2005 which deals with the rights of the victims of international crimes and human rights violations. This particular instrument is called Basic Principle and Guidelines on the Right to a Remedy and Reparation for Victims of Gross Violations of International Human Rights Law and Serious Violations of International Humanitarian Law 2005. This principle, while in their draft form, were quoted with the approval by the apex court in case of State of Gujarat versus Honorable High Court of Gujarat in 1998. The apex court, while quoting the declaration, observed that the declaration shall be applicable in the cases where the compensation is economically assessable. Further, damage resulting from violation of human rights or international humanitarian law should be quantifiable. Compensation is also contemplated in cases of emotional distress, loss of earning potential and harm to reputation. In India, the recognition of compensatory rights in Criminal Procedure Code has been multi-phases edification in Indian jurisprudence. In India, it has evolved in stages through combined efforts of legislature, judiciary, law commission reports and other expert committee reports like Justice Malimat Committee, Madhav Menon Committee, etc. Section 545 of the old code of 1898 provided for the power of the court to award compensation to the person who has suffered loss or injury due to the offence, if substantial compensation is recoverable in a civil court. So, only in those cases compensation can be awarded by the court where it is recovered as a substantial compensation. However, Law Commission in its 42nd report was not comfortable with this proposition of receiving substantial compensation, and that is why suggested the removal of the term. According to section 545, compensation was payable to by the accused if he is convicted, and secondly, fine is also a part of sentence. The effect of this particular clause was mitigated when 1898 code was replaced by 1973, whereby section 357 was introduced. In clause 3 of section 357, it was provided that even when fine is not part of sentence, court can pass order of compensation. Pertinently, compensation can be ordered by court at any stage, be it at trial or at appellate court level. Parallelly, while there were a lot of developments on the part of the legislature, apex court also started laying down the ground for compensatory jurisprudence. In case of Palyanappa Goundar versus State of Tamil Nadu, the Supreme Court for the first time directed the accused to pay the compensation, which was to be realized from the amount of fine. Further, in case of State of Haryana versus Sukhbir Singh and other, a case of 1988, apex court observed the power under section 357 of the Code of Criminal Procedure is a measure of responding appropriately to crime as well as reconciling the victim with the offender. Another remarkable judgment of the apex court is Rudal Shah versus State of Bihar, a 1983 judgment, wherein the court advocated that new tools can be created for the purpose of providing complete justice to the victim. The judgments which are responsible for the evolving compensatory jurisprudence by the Supreme Court are Rudal Shah versus State of Bihar 1983, Vishakha versus State of Rajasthan 1997, D.K. Basu versus State of West Bengal 1997. All these judgments are illustrative of the liberal approach in granting the compensation to the victims while exercising constitutional writ jurisdiction enumerated in Article 32 in the case of Supreme Court of India and Article 226 in the case of High Courts. The instrumentalities of the state were made liable in these cases so that they pay the compensation. In the case of Nilbati Behra versus State of Odisha, a 1993 judgment, and in the case of Chairman Railway Board versus Chandrima Das, the liability of the instrumentality of the state was very clearly laid down by the Supreme Court. So, the doctrine that the king can do no wrong was taken away from the Indian jurisprudence through these judgments. Another important judgment is that of the Rohtash versus State of Haryana. This is a Punjab and Haryana High Court judgment. What happened in this judgment? The High Court commented on the dismayed state of the victims vis-a-vis Section 357 implementation and echoed the recommendation of Malimath Committee report of 2003. And what it observed is very pertinent. It said that Section 357 had certain inherent limitations. The said provision can be invoked only upon conviction, that too at the discretion of the judge and subject to financial capacity to pay by the accused. The award of compensation dependable on conviction was so absurd and unworkable in the Indian context, where the conviction rate is as low as less than 10%. Though the recent records of the National Crime Records Bureau show a remarkable high in the conviction rate, but it's not still satisfactory. And asking a poor accused to pay for the compensation was again a very pathetic situation and represented the drawback of Section 357. This victim derived no real benefit from the provision of Section 357. Further, majority of the crimes in India are unreported or are those where the offender is untraceable, and thus justice for victims remained illusionary. Pursuant to various judicial decisions, 152nd and 154th Law Commission of India reports and the 2008 amendment in the CRPC, followed by the latest 2013 criminal law amendment, various provisions which are beneficial to the victims were introduced. Section 357A was inserted in the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973. This section provided for state obligation to pay the compensation to victims, focusing on their rehabilitation irrespective of the fact that accused is tried or not. Thus, it is a departure from the previous practice. Previously, only offender could pay the compensation. State was made liable to pay the compensation, but only through the judgments of the Supreme Court or the High Court. There was no particular legislative provision. Secondly, it is a departure because previously the requirement was that accused should be convicted. However, an important provision which this section brings is that the compensation is payable whether the accused is tried or not. This change was brought keeping particularly in mind the requirement of rehabilitation of victim of sexual offences. The victim can approach either the state or district legal service authority to get the compensation. There are two conditions for the payment of compensation under 357. First, compensation under 357 is not adequate for the rehabilitation. Second, case ends in acquittal or discharge and victim has to be rehabilitated. This forward-looking provision, however, didn't garner immediate attention from states. The Supreme Court noted in the case of Suresh versus State of Haryana that in spite of various affidavits and counter affidavits asked by the Supreme Court to be filed by the state, only 25 states were found to have complied with the provisions of Section 357A. Only 25 states had notified victim compensation scheme. But the main important point was the upper limit of compensation even fixed by these states was so arbitrarily low that it was not keeping with the object of the legislation. The Apex Court has also recognized in plethora of decisions right of victim to get an interim compensation. Now, this particular provision is very much relevant. It is very true that victims should get the compensation at the end of a trial. And sometime a trial may take 20 years, 25 years. Then what do the victim do at that point of time? How does the victim get the relief? Therefore, the Supreme Court find that there is a necessity to provide the interim compensation, because in certain nature of crime the immediate relief is required, and there is a very well known maxim that the justice delayed is justice denied, and delaying the compensation can deny the justice to the victim. Thus, this was recognized for the first time in the case of Bodhisattva Gautam versus Ms. Shubhra Chakraborty. Further, Clause 3 of Section 18 of the Protection of Human Rights Act 1993 also gives the power to the National Human Rights Commission and the State Human Rights Commission to award interim compensation in the appropriate cases. This power has been very openly used by the State Human Rights Commission and the National Human Rights Commission in the appropriate commission, where they have found that yes, the case of the violation of the human rights have been made out. Importantly, the newly added Section 357A has received lot of attention from the Supreme Court in several decisions, including Ankush Shivaji Gaikwad versus State of Maharashtra, 2013 judgment. Another important judgment which deals with the interpretation of Section 357A are Muhammad Harun versus Union of India, 2014, and Lakshmi versus Union of India, again a 2014 judgment. Section 357B and 357C were further added by the Criminal Law Amendment 2013. We will come to these sections as and when it will be relevant for the present discussion. So, after analyzing the evolution of compensatory jurisprudence, let us discuss factors which are to be considered by the court while granting compensation. Now, there are lot of judgments which have been passed by the Supreme Court and the High Court, and there are at least certain principles which can be culled out, which has to be remembered by the lower courts while awarding the compensation. They are, first of all, in every case the capacity of the accused to pay should be judged. How much accused can pay the compensation? So, grant of highly unreasonable compensation or an excessive compensation may not be fruitful, and that is why the Supreme Court suggested, in order to determine the capacity of the accused, a summary inquiry may also be conducted. Further, how much amount of compensation has to be given can also be taken into account by considering the factors like nature of offence, impact on the victim. Further, the apex court says compensation should be reasonable. Further, the justness of the claim should also be examined by the trial court while awarding the compensation. Another important condition is there exists a mandatory duty on the court to apply its mind to the question in every criminal case. So, a judge cannot mechanically deny the award of compensation. Judge has to apply the mind irrespective of the terminology of Section 357 Clause 3, which use the word may. So, the term may in the context of Clause 3 of Section 357 has been interpreted as shall by the Supreme Court of India, and thus imposing a mandatory duty, so that a judge does not exercise the power at its whims and the caprices. Apart from Code of Criminal Procedure, there are certain other legislations which provide for the payment of compensation to the victim. For example, Section 5 of Probation of Offenders Act 1958, the court may order to pay compensation to victim while releasing the accused on admonition or probation. Also, the Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act 1989, the Workmen's Compensation Act of 1923, Motor Vehicles Act of 1988, the Fatal Accidents Act of 1855 also provides for the payment of compensation. Indeed, there is a provision of no fault liability under section 140 of the Motor Vehicles Act when the accused has to pay compulsorily a certain amount of sum to the victim. Now, lastly, we will talk about right to assistance of victims. The victim assistance includes services like crisis intervention, counseling, emergency shelter, criminal justice advocacy and emergency transportation. The underlying principle is that state has to provide necessary assistance to the victim because victim may have lost everything as a consequence of crime. Therefore, to restore the balance of victim, he may require or she may require medical, financial or legal assistance. In certain cases, after crime, victims are left destitute and without any family or peer support. Justice is not merely initiation or conclusion of the legal process, but also to provide that healing to the victim outside the legal system. The basic principles of justice as enumerated by UN in 1985 recognize this right of assistance, and it provides victims should receive the necessary material, medical, psychological and social assistance through governmental, voluntary, community-based and indigenous means. Victims should be informed of the availability of health and social services and other relevant assistance and be readily afforded access to them. Police, justice, health, social service and other personnel concerned should receive training to sensitize them to the needs of victim and guideline to ensure proper and prompt aid. In providing services and assistance to victim, attention should particularly be given to those who have special needs because of the nature of the harm inflicted or other factors as discussed above. The right of victims to have assistance can be broadly classified into following. First, legal assistance. Second, medical assistance. Third, counseling and support services. Fourth, assistance by way of rehabilitation. And fifth, financial assistance. Let's discuss the provision in law which deals with medical assistance. Section 164A talks about medical examination of victim of rape. Section 357C provides for treatment of victims. It says that all hospitals, public or private, whether run by central government, state government, local bodies or any other person, shall immediately provide the first aid or medical treatment, that too free of cost to the victim of any offence. However, the term any offence is curtailed by a rider clause which says that offence mentioned under section 326A, 376, 376A to D or section 376 of the IPC are only included for the purpose of section 357C. Further, section 326A, which has been introduced recently by 2013 criminal amendment, says that fine in the case of offence of acid attack should be paid to the victim, and such fine shall be just and reasonable to meet the medical expenses of the treatment of the victim. Now, let's look at the provision in law which deals with legal assistance. Section 154 of Code of Criminal Procedure provides that the information in the case of offences under section 326A, 326B, 354, 354A to D, 376, 376A to E and the offences basically which concerns the woman. In all these offences, FIR should be recorded by a woman police officer or any woman officer. In such offences against women, if the victim is temporarily or permanently mentally or physically disabled, then the information should be recorded by the police officer at the residence of or a convenient place of choice in the presence of an interpreter or a special educator. In addition to this, Section 164 Clause 5A provides that statement in such offences should be recorded by the magistrate as soon as commission of offence is brought to the notice of police. It also provides for assistance of special educator or interpreter if the victim is permanently or temporarily disabled, mental or physical. Such statement should be videographed, and in case required, such statement can be used in lieu of examination in chief at the time of the trial. Another important section is Section 301 of CRPC. It stipulates that a victim claim is represented by state through the public prosecutor. Victim counsel can submit written arguments to the court, and that's the extent to which victim counsel can help the public prosecutor. However, there is certain locus given to the victim in the cases where the public prosecutor is representing the case also. So that a balance can be maintained and the public prosecutor does not abuse the process or abuse his power, and the victim counsel can have a check on the public prosecutor. In cases where victim who is mentally or physically disabled has to identify an accused, then such identification should be carried in the presence of a judicial magistrate. The method with which victim is comfortable should be ensured by the judicial magistrate during the process of identification, and same shall be videographed. Further, the appropriate measures should be taken to ensure that the victim of rape or sexual offences who is minor doesn't confront the accused during the cross examination. This is very important provision as far as victim of sexual offences are concerned, and this prevents to a great degree secondary victimization also. So this was about the right of restitution, assistance and compensation. We have discussed various concepts, rationale of various rights, how they are integrated in various national and international legal instruments, and the role of courts in expanding them. Now we will summarize the above discussion. In primitive society, the concept of restitution was very much there. The state usurped the justice dispensation function and made the criminal law its monopoly. This resulted in dilution of restitution and compensatory measures in the criminal law. Thus arose the distinction between torts and crime. The victim became the forgotten entity, and the goal was to punish the offender. The aim of justice were retributive and deterrent. Starting from 1940s, victim rights movement picked momentum. At international front, UK became the first nation to come up with pro-victim legislation. In 1985, UN Declaration of Basic Principle of Justice for Victim of Crime and Abuse of Power recognized restitution and compensation along with assistance as the pivotal rights of the victim. In India, ever since 1898, there was provision for compensation, but as observed by Supreme Court, 41st, 152nd and 154th Law Commission report along with Malimat Committee report and Madhav Menon Committee report, this provision has been seldomly invoked. And that's why there are a lot of changes which have been brought through number of amendments in this particular provision of compensation under section 357 of CRPC. Higher judiciary has also played a prominent role in advancing victims' right jurisprudence. Various judgments of the apex court have resulted into amendments in law. For example, Bodhisattva Gautam versus Ms. Shubhra Chakraborty, the expansion of writ jurisdiction in cases like Rudal Shah, DK Basu, Vishakha, Khatri, UCC, that is Union Carbide Corporation, etc., has also provided social justice to the victim by making the state liable to pay the compensation. Consequently, victim compensation scheme came in 2009. Measure of victim assistance, especially rape and acid victims, were introduced in 2013. Though the term restitution and compensation are interchangeably used, mind it, they have distinct meanings as we have already discussed above. I hope this video gave you the insight into the concept and evolution of victim rights. For further understanding of the same, you can take the self-assessment and refer suggested readings. Thank you.